Welcome back to Kicks and Picks podcast. Coach Steve back with you along with Scotty. I know I have been mostly MIA the past couple months of the season, but with a new baby and a toddler, not always easy to get on here. But the guy's been doing a great job holding it down. Nick is away for work this week, so haven't gotten the whole trio together in some time. But Scott and I are here to talk about transfer rumors and happenings and some looking ahead to some futures and talking about our clubs a little bit because they're in the rumor mill a lot lately and making some too soon projections to close it out. So, Scotty, I know you guys talked a little bit with Martino a couple weeks ago about some early futures and things like that. But how you doing this week? And then I think we'll just kick it off.
Yeah, good. I mean, we're a month out. I think that's the headline of today is we're about 30 days away
Yeah.
from season kickoff, at least in the Premier League. I think Italy sometimes starts the week after the Premier League starts, but either way, we're right there. Still got another 6 weeks or so of the transfer window, though. That's the tricky part. I still don't love the fact that the transfer window stays open for the first few weeks of the season. I would love for everything to just kind of close on the same day, but
Yeah.
it's one of the quirks of European football, so you live with it. But yeah, I mean, I would say as a Liverpool fan, optimistic. Feels like there's some good moves happening. Obviously, already a solid transfer window this far with getting Verts in, but more to come. And excited to see what happens over the next 3 or 4 weeks as we get into these preseason tournaments. You see a lot of the clubs going to Asia and into the US doing some of the preseason friendlies now. I know we had Club World Cup, but I think that's more so a measurement of what's happened with the squads in the last season, more so than it is a representation of what these clubs will look like next season. So excited to see what these new look teams start to look like and make some, again, all too soon early predictions about how that is going to carry over into the first half of the season.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the transfer market not closing till like August 30th, whatever the league starts. A couple weeks before that, I know for me as a Roma fan, that's always something that is in play because Roma, for the past I don't even know how many years, has been under the FFP gun often, and they try
Mm,
to wait until the last minute to make certain deals so they could get guys on loan. I remember when Lukaku came 2 seasons ago, he didn't come to like the third match of the season, so it's tough because you bring in a new manager like Gasparini now. We're going to talk about their transfer market and what's going on with it soon, but you kick off preseason, none of your transfers have arrived yet. And in past years with Mourinho and others, those guys don't arrive until the first match sometimes, and there's no time to really integrate them into the side properly. It could lead to slow starts. We saw it last year with the side. So, and I feel like in Italy, especially because these clubs don't have the money these Premier League clubs have to spend.
hmm
When we go through some of the transfer happenings, not many clubs are spending a lot of money. One thing I noticed as I was running through transfer market before we came on, a lot of the expenditures of these Serie A clubs are players that were previously on loan with them and the obligations
hmm
come due or the options were exercised or whatever. So it's a little misleading about how much they actually spent. Yes, it goes on this year's budget, but at the same time, they're not players that are really augmenting the quality of the squad or raising the level to some extent. So that's always a little caveat with the transfer market too, because a lot of these clubs look for the loan with option to buy or obligation to just push things down the road, kick that can down the road a little bit further. So
Yeah, I mean, that has been an interesting wrinkle, more so I'd say this summer than previous summers with this, whatever you want to call it, PSR, profitability and sustainability rules, or FFP, financial fair play, whatever you want to say, the soft salary or transfer cap that each club supposedly has now if you want to compete in UEFA competitions or in Premier League's case, in the top flight of English Premier League football. So you'll see some clubs that are well within their guidelines and accounting rules and can spend freely. Then you'll see some clubs that you don't really expect having to maybe cash in on a player they'd prefer not to have to cash in on just because they need to make a little bit of profit. And I think it's an interesting wrinkle. Like the past few summers, I think we've kind of laughed about it because we've seen Chelsea come in and spend whatever 500 million pounds in a single summer
yeah,
or in back-to-back summers, and we've kind of laughed it off as this not so serious thing. But I don't know if it's just because it's finally settled in now. It's in year 3 or 4 of these rules and regulations, and we're starting to see some teams kind of get dinged with it, whether it's points deductions or coming close to getting a points deduction and having to scramble last minute to just do some like accounting levers, as Barcelona likes to call it. I think it seems to actually be impacting this summer more so than previous summers, and I think Italy is probably feeling the brunt of that. We know that they struggle with revenues in terms of, most of these clubs don't own their own stadiums, right? That's where a lot
Yeah.
of the revenue comes from Premier League clubs. It's obviously the TV rights, but also they own their own stadiums, and they have 60, 70,000 seat stadiums, most of these top 6, 7 clubs. So they get a ton of match day revenue. And so I think that's like, it's just a little interesting piece to this summer that I don't really think I've noticed as much in previous summers.
Yeah, I mean, the Champions Napoli, one of the clubs that are reinforcing the most from what I've seen, either transfers that have been made or transfers that seem very close in the media. I'll share, we'll go through the transfer market list a little bit. We're going to focus on Como for one because they've been spending, but I'll just bring up that tab so the viewers have a visual of what we're talking about here. And I think they just went in order of finished last season in the order they listed the clubs. If you ever look on transfer market, but when we look at, for example, Napoli, they brought in Noah Lang, official today, actually 25 million left winger from PSV. Lorenzo Luca, striker at Udinese, has been linked, and that seems to be the striker that's going to happen for them after the Darwin Nunez rumors have died down because the salary is just too much for them to handle. And then Vanja Milinkovic-Savic I saw as well, the goalkeeper from Torino. That's SMS's brother. If you remember him from his Lazio days when he was one of the best midfielders in the league. Very solid
Great
goalkeeper.
midfielder in Saudi now too.
Yeah.
I think they won the Saudi league, right? He won the Saudi league this year.
Yeah. Definitely one of those guys who left in his prime years, for sure. His brother, very good keeper, one of the top keepers in the league last year, and he looks like he's moving to Napoli too. So Napoli really reinforcing a squad that surprised many, including myself, by winning the league last year. Antonio Conte worked his magic, tends to do that, especially when he doesn't have Europe to play for. This year he will be in Europe, so they're going to try to reinforce that with players like Lang, and we can't forget KDB came in on the free transfer. I'm sure his minutes will have to be managed a bit, but he's still, even at 34 years old, a player who has the qualities to, in certain moments, unlock matches, and we'll see how he holds up in Serie A. But Napoli certainly making moves to reinforce a squad that I think for good reason they are the betting favorites right now when we get to the futures.
Yeah. First of all, shout out John, one of our loyal watchers of every week. Glad to see you in the chat. Everybody else, feel free to hop in the chat. We'll plenty to discuss this week. So happy to answer any questions. But yeah, I mean, De Bruyne, I'm very interested in, right? I think, obviously the age stands out here. 34 years old, didn't play much last season. His legs are kind of going a little bit. Obviously still has that high-end talent. He makes those passes that very few players you probably count in one hand can make. But at the same time, you have Milan looking at a player like Luka Modric, who probably has more years and more miles on him, but probably still can contribute. So I'll be very interested to see how both of those guys hold up in a full season of league play, whether they're going to be playing 30 plus matches this year. I don't know. But can they come in, start, handful of matches here and there, come in as, 60-minute subs elsewhere? Like, if you can properly manage the fact that these guys are older and that we know the club seasons nowadays are a little bit more demanding than they have been in years past, can you effectively manage their minutes to the point where they can be valuable contributors throughout the season? Or do you run into issues where they're going to be out, for months at a time because they're having muscle injuries or the like? So very curious. I mean, that could be a home run hit for them, or it could end up being a dud, depending on how Conte uses De Bruyne.
Yeah, I think, I think of Totti when he got up there in age, right? And in certain matches, he could just unlock the match still because you just have that vision, that passing, that natural ability. I'm not saying he's on Totti's level, even at the advanced age, but, he might be that kind of player for them, right? You play him in the right matches and the right scenarios, and he could give you that quality. I think you're right, though. I don't see him playing 30 matches. Maybe he plays, if there's a big Champions League match, he plays that match, takes a match or two off in Serie A, then is available again for a big match. Like, I think he's going to have to be managed to some extent, even more so than, like, say, Roma has to manage Dybala, because Dybala's still got, I think, a few more years in his legs than De Bruyne at this age. But I think it's that kind of scenario.
Maybe as injury prone, though.
Yes.
So,
yeah,
close.
Yeah,
I get the point on the age, but I think you still got to manage Dybala if you want to keep him healthy.
Of course,
for a full
yes,
slate of games.
Yes. So we'll see. And their biggest challengers last year were Inter. Inter probably felt like they should have won the Scudetto. They let it slip away in many ways. So far, they've brought in younger players. Luis Enrique, right midfielder from Marseille, 23 million. Ange Joan Boni from Parma, 21-year-old striker for 23 million as well. Petar Sucic, defensive midfielder, 21 years old from Zagreb for 14 million. So they are certainly looking a little bit younger. I know they have their own financial restraints. A player like Boni will, probably play the reserve role that Arnautovic is leaving on a free transfer. So we'll see if those young players can really contribute this year, or if they are ready to contribute this year. But that'll be an interesting thing to watch with Inter. Atalanta is spending. We see player from Leverkusen, Kosunu, center back. Suleimana from Southampton, left winger. I don't know how much you know about him from the Premier League. But at the same time, they lose their manager in Gasperini, right? And I think Inter, I forgot to mention that too. They lost, Inzaghi to the Saudi league and are bringing in, going with Kivu, who's a younger manager, not experienced. Atalanta brings in Ivan Juric, who at Roma was a complete dud, and then at Southampton was a complete dud. So that to me is they're spending money. They also lose Retegui on the big move to the Saudi league.
Yeah, that's
so
the one that hurts.
Like that is a club I'm going to keep an eye on, because Gasperini for 9 years did amazing work with them. Won a Europa League, qualified for Champions League quite a few times. I think Europa League was his only trophy he won. If anybody in the chat knows for sure, correct me if I'm wrong. But as close as they came in Serie A and the Coppa Italia, that was the only one they actually won. But the work he did was amazing. And now you bring in a guy like Juric, who was a good mid-table manager for Torino, for Hellas Verona. He did pretty decent work with them, but then complete bust at
disaster.
Roma. Yeah. And didn't do anything to help Southampton save themselves. So, interesting hire. So I don't know. Yeah, John says I'm right. So that is true. Good to know. Thanks, John. So, they're going to be interesting to watch. Juve, the only player they've brought in is Jonathan David on a free transfer. These other transfers we see listed here, Nico Gonzalez, Lloyd Kelly, Michele Di Gregorio, and Pierre Colulu, were all players that were on loan last year. And then they, those deals become permanent transfers. So not really spending on new talent. David, I think, is a good signing. I guess he's the one out of these last three clubs that we've, gone through their transfers that really warrants talking about, I think, Scott. I think, solid player, played really well in France for Lille. 25 years old, entering his prime.
Yeah, the question around him is just his availability.
Yeah.
I think he's one of those players that I feel like plays better for the national team than he ever does for his club. Like he had a good season with Lille, I want to say maybe 2 years ago. But more often than not, when I'm hearing his name, it's associated with Canada. It's not associated with what he's doing for his club. And that happens. There's players that are like that for whatever reason. And so I'm curious. I think this is it's probably the right move for him at the right time. I think if he's, at 25, if he's going to break out and become, a nailed on striker that's in the top, echelon of Europe right now, like this is the place to do it. Yeah. Juve, historically, we kind of joke about, not exactly the most offensive and attacking club, but I think with the right players, they certainly can be. Obviously the issues with Vlahovic over the last 2 years or so have probably limited them more so than what their style of play would really dictate. But
look like Nick's joining us from the airport.
Yeah, Nick on that fly.
Jonathan David is a PK merchant. So
yeah, but again, you can't argue with free. What's the risk here? You're paying a player's salary. There's really nothing wrong with that.
And you're replacing Vlahovic, who was not good for them, right? And who they're having trouble offloading for any reasonable amount of money, it seems.
So I think it's a good play for Juve. I mean, it's certainly worth whatever risk there might be here. And if things go out, really well, you might have a top, I don't want to say top 10, but fringe top 15-ish striker in Europe potentially, that you can, build around a little bit, have probably 3, maybe 5 good seasons out of. If you need to cash in for, PSR purposes, you certainly can, because it's a free transfer. So if you can move them on, in 3 years from now for 40 or 50 million, that's a huge success story. You can then flip that around and do a lot with that money. But I think it's a solid move. I wouldn't go out right now and bet, Jonathan David over 15 goals, for example, for a season.
Okay. We'll see if those lines become available and said, we'll have to talk about those things in the preview episode. Sometimes they're available, maybe not to bet here in the U.S., but they sometimes will show up on some of the odds checker websites. So that's always interesting to me to see where they project those kind of goal scores. Roma, no incoming moves yet. We'll talk about their rumors a little bit later, since am here, and I talk about that a lot in my other show and write about it, and it's always frustrating. Fiorentina, Fagioli, Gunnarsson, those are, moves that become permanent. Same with Gosens, Fazzini. So Edin Dzeko, the free transfer, is the
How is he still playing?
Yeah, 39 years old,
That's
coming
crazy.
in on a free transfer. I think he did all right at Fenerbahce too. I don't know how much he'll have to give at 39. He's gonna be a backup striker, probably to Moise Kane. Yeah, we'll see. I mean,
is he going to be there? He's Bosnia, right?
Yes,
they're not going to be in the World Cup, right? They're not a.
I doubt it. I don't know what their qualifying group looks like.
I'm trying to figure out if that's his play right now, as he's trying to stay fresh for the World Cup.
I mean, it could be his play if he thinks they can qualify. I mean, that would probably be the reason he's still going, I'd imagine.
That's crazy.
They had a good year last year. I mean, Italiano did some pretty good work with them. He's one of the better up-and-coming managers in Serie A, so we'll see what he can do with this side. But again, no big moves coming in at this point besides Dzeko. Lazio, all these moves you see here were guys who were there last year, and now those loans become obligations. So really nothing to talk about on the Lazio front at this point. Milan, Samuele Ricci, pretty good midfielder, young midfielder from Torino, comes in at 23 million euros. Luka Modric on the free transfer. Like you said, again, he's 39 years old. So those are two players who come in. I think Ricci is a nice player. I think he could help. But again, that is replacing Tijani Reinders, who moved to Man City for 55 million. That's the big loss, right? So I think of the clubs we've discussed so far, that is the biggest loss anybody's had to, absorb in the market here. Teo Hernandez also leaves. He was a fixture in the squad. I don't think he was the greatest left back, but certainly had some really good matches for them at times. Had not so great ones at other times, but still a pretty big loss for a club like Milan, whose budget is not the biggest. So that'll be interesting to see how they replace Reinders and Hernandez, if Ricci can step up, and what they do at the left back position. But to me, I mean, when we talk about futures, Milan, not the kind of club I'm willing to go out on a limb for.
Not right now.
No.
I mean, we talked a little bit about that with Martino. There's certainly more chaos right now than there needs to be in the club, and things might be clearer in a couple weeks. But yeah, it's not a team that you want to kind of invest in right now.
Yeah. Bologna. Actually, Italiano's side now is Bologna. I made a mistake with Fiorentina. That was 2 seasons ago. Won the Coppa Italia last year, right? Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was there. That was their big thing last year. They bring Casale from Lazio, center back, 27 years old. Reasonable fee, $6.5 million. Ciro Immobile comes in on a free transfer. Nick's
not from Lazio.
Old
former
friend.
Lazio.
Yeah, former Lazio from Besiktas. He is back in Serie A. Vitek from Sparta Prague, another center back. But this is a side who is also rumored to be losing some pretty good players. Ndoye, who I forgot to mention when we were on Napoli, rumored to be going there. I know the Lucemi, I forget how you pronounce his name, but the center back has been linked with various clubs. So they're a club that they lost a lot last year. They're going to have to absorb some more losses this year. We'll see what kind of work they can do. There's Nick. If you don't think Orsolini Immobile and Bernardeschi is everything I've ever dreamed of. Yes, Bernardeschi also rumored to be heading there on a free after his contract was cut with Toronto FC. So Nick will be watching every Bologna match next season. Might be rooting for them against Lazio with those three playing up front.
All right, Coach. It might be time for our first prediction. Next season, how many pods do we have where Nick speaks positively of Lazio versus how many pods do we have where Nick speaks positively of Bologna?
As long as his three boys are getting minutes, I think I would take, I don't know, -2.5 for Bologna, at least -2.5 maybe.
Okay, that's a fair number. It also depends on who's going to manage Lazio at this point, because that's still an open question,
right?
Yeah,
that's Sadi's situation. And Nick could chime in the chat and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's some kind of transfer ban, or they can't make some transfers or something, which is why he was talking about leaving. He took the job knowing they couldn't, and it's a kind of a mess.
I mean, the poor guy's been in the hospital the last day too. It's making him sick. You can't deal with the stress of it all.
If the stress wasn't enough,
it's definitely not the cigarettes that he chain smokes.
The things are even worse. So, all right, now we get to the club we wanted to talk about, which is why we've kind of been going through that. Nick says poorest club doesn't make sense to me. They can't sign anyone. All right. So Como, Scott, they were kind of like the darlings last year. They came within, touching distance of European places. They were the surprise club. We talked about the value that was on them as a potential relegation side, being a newly promoted side, and they never really had any fear of relegation last year. It was just a value line, really. So far, Jesus Rodriguez, 19-year-old left winger from Real Betis, 22.5 million euros. Nicholas Kuhn, right winger from Celtic, German player, 19 million euros. Martin Baturina, 22-year-old attacking midfielder from Zagreb, 18 million. Jadon Adai, 14 million from Alkmaar, right winger. I mean, you see the spending is there, right? A lot of young players, high upside. The only one that you could really say is probably in his prime years at this point is Kuhn. And then a couple, depth players like Luca Mizzatelli from Frosinone on a cheap transfer just to build some depth. But they're bringing in players that they think Fabregas can do some work with.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think if you ask most people right now that follow European football, the club that they have the most intrigue around, not necessarily who they're rooting for, rooting against, who they want to watch play week in and week out, the one that they're most interested in seeing how the project unfolds, especially this next season, I think it's got to be Como. Yeah. Fabregas has the potential to being a hot commodity manager, similar to what we saw with Xabi Alonso at Bayer Leverkusen. And I think this season is going to dictate a lot of that. There's real hype around, with some of these top clubs in Italy being relatively stagnant, maybe having a not so great summer where they have to sell players and balance the books. Does that leave the window open for Como to kind of sneak in here and steal a spot, get into a European position for 2026?
I do think so. I do think the window's definitely there for them because we've had the manager carousel, right, with some of the clubs, Inter, Milan, Roma, Fiorentina, Pioli's there now, Lazio, Atalanta, like all these clubs are getting new managers. And I mean, at least in my opinion, the only club that really upgraded their manager was and not upgraded because Ranieri was bad. He was leaving regardless, but upgraded from what they had to start the year with De Rossi and Juric is Roma, in my opinion. Like Kivu's not better than Inzaghi at this point, right? Mm-hmm. Is Allegri better at this point in his career? Maybe. So maybe you could say Milan upgraded. He knows the league better, maybe a little more pragmatic, but the squad, like we said, doesn't impress us. Atalanta, big downgrade, right? Lazio, it depends what happens with Sadi. He's an upgrade probably over what they had, but they also overperformed last year. Fiorentina, Pioli, I don't know. Is he still any good this year? I don't know. So I think, the Fabregas did a great job last year. And let's not forget that they did keep Nico Paz for another season from Real Madrid. He was their big player. They are an intriguing side. And when you look at the futures, I'll share that over here now that we're talking about it. We don't have top 4 futures or top 6 futures available for Italy right now, but when you look, Como's future is better than Fiorentina and Bologna's right now. 2 clubs that finished ahead of them in the table last year. Bologna, club that's going to be playing in Europe, right? So the books see value in Como. Unfortunately in the U.S., we don't always get those to finish top 6 or finish top 7 lines available to us like you do with the Premier League, which is a European spot. We usually get top 4 and to win the league. Are they top 4 worthy? I don't know. I mean, if the number's right, maybe you roll the dice a little bit. If you buy the squad and the squad they're putting together and the continuity with Fabregas and things like that. But I'd love to see, even if it's something I can't bet here in the U.S., what the books have them for as to finish top 6 when it comes around. Because right now they're plus 5,000 to win the league, and that is the 7th shortest odds in the league. So, not bad for a club that was in Serie B 2 seasons ago.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, the style of players they brought in already, they're young, attacking players. 3 of the 4 have experience in European competition. Kuhn and Baturina both have been playing in the Champions League the last couple seasons. Jesus Rodriguez, Conference League. So these are the guys that, they might be the ones that kind of help them push them forward. We talk about, especially in Serie A, the teams that finish in the top 6 or so are the teams that are able to turn draws into wins. It's going from the 1 point to 3 points. That's where you stack up some of these, extra points. And yes, like Serie A, always going to be a very defense focused league. defense first, the teams that usually win the league are the teams that are usually in the top 2 or 3 of goals allowed.
Yeah.
But you can still make a case, and we've seen that with Atalanta, where you can get into top 4, top 5 pretty consistently if you have a high powered offense. So if they're going in, getting younger players with European experience that can help create and score goals, it's a little interesting gambit, I think. You trust Fabregas to know how to like shape the squad on any given match day, because he has proven to be at least a decent manager, like we just mentioned, but potentially has a high ceiling. There's a lot that could go right for Como this year. So it'll be interesting. Like once we get those odds, I think we'll get them closer to league kickoff.
Yeah.
I think that's one that we're all kind of monitoring with pretty significant interest, because I think both of us right now in our pre-pod discussion are pretty high on Como and what their potential could be for the season, especially in relation to where the books have them too, right? Plus 5,000 to win the league. Yeah, probably not going to buy it. Maybe I'll look at their schedule. If I think they have an easy schedule the first month, I might buy it just to sell out of it after a month and then reinvest elsewhere. But certainly a top 4 future right now. If it was easily available, I would certainly be talked into it.
Yeah, if it's in the thousands, right? It's definitely something to consider. If they're plus 5,000 to win the league, you think plus at least 2,000 be top 4, right? At this point, I'm just taking a wild guess, but you would think it'd be a very solid number. I know we're going to talk Premier League strikers, Scotty, but maybe since we're on Serie A, we'll talk Roma a little bit since I'm here, because that's the team that is active in the rumor mill. How many of these transfers come to fruition? We'll see, but I was looking at the futures, and at the moment when I see Roma plus 1,400 on BetMGM, I'm probably going to lock that in before the transfers happen. Now, is that me being a bit of a homer? Maybe a little bit, but when I look at the odds and I look at the way they finished the season, the manager they brought in, I think Napoli is still the clear favorite to win the league. But I think if you're looking for like a longer shot number that you want to put something on that's over plus 500 or so, I think that's the number. Like, I'm way more comfortable laying a little bit of money on Roma at plus 1,400 right now than Milan at plus 650. Nick said the same thing. Yeah, he's already placed it at plus 1,400. Like, that is the side that I think is the sleeper side. I've heard this many times with Roma. People get excited. I mean, they haven't made a transfer official yet. But when we're talking futures, that's the one I'm looking at. I mean, if you want a safer bet, probably Napoli is the one to go with, in my opinion, at this point, with the way the Mercato is going. But if you want to take a flyer on a long shot, I think that's the one, considering the coaching move and the players that are linked. Now, talking about those links, Roma does need players, right, to really fill out the squad for Gasperini and make that 1,400 look even more attractive before the line moves. But Evan Ferguson, player you're familiar with from the Premier League, Scott, high upside young player who had some injury issues, but was scoring goals in the Premier League at 19 years old for Brighton. What do you think of him as a potential striker moving to Serie A?
Yeah, I think he's one of those guys that a lot of the top clubs like Chelsea and even to an extent City had their eye on as like, hey, this is a homegrown player. He's young. He's converting chances on a very talented Brighton team. Let's kind of like keep that in our back pocket and maybe make a move for him in the next window or two. And then, as you mentioned, had injury issues, hasn't quite panned out the way he wanted. I think he had a loan move to West Ham that didn't go very well. And so I think it's a good time to get in on him, because he's shown early on that he has the talent and the ability to contribute at a regular cadence. We also know that there's a pretty good track record right now of some of these younger English talents that haven't quite panned out in the Premier League moving to Serie A and having success. And so if you're Roma right now and you're looking for a guy that, you want to take a little bit of a risk with and see if you can turn him into a 10, 15 goal player, Evan Ferguson certainly is a good opportunity. Do I think he's going to be a guy that sets the league on fire and is going to challenge for the Golden Boot? No, probably not. Not at least not initially, maybe in like 3 or 4 years, but that's obviously a potential as a 20-year-old. Like, if he works out, maybe you can keep him around for a while. But certainly a guy that has a lot of high upside to him. We've seen it. Like I said, we've seen it time and time again. Even going back with someone like Lookman, played for Everton, had moments of brilliance, but couldn't find a consistent vein of form that made him a top player. Comes to Atalanta, and I think he's been very impressive with Atalanta since he's been here. So can Evan Ferguson do something similar, or Tammy Abraham for Roma, right? Didn't quite fit in for Chelsea, but came over to Roma and had a great first season, not so much afterwards. Yeah, I think the potential's certainly there. So love the move for Roma. I think it's a really good fit. We'll be very interested to see how many games he actually starts. That's my big question. Like, is he a nailed on starter day one, or is he going to be a guy that's going to have to fight for a place and maybe comes off the bench more often than not?
Yeah, be interesting because Dovbyk spent big money on Dovbyk last season, right? If he's still there, you have to think he's getting minutes too. So the two that have been linked a lot, Richard Rios, Colombian midfielder from Palmeiras, who had a really good Club World Cup and looks like a really good player at 25 years old. They're haggling over the price. He is said to have to want Roma. Last I read, Palmeiras wants 30 million. Roma tried to offer 27 plus 3 in bonuses. They want all 30 to be fixed. So that is the sticking point there. I mean, he's a player that, from everything I've read and seen, he is a really good fit for Gasperini ball. If he comes in, the midfield, it becomes really dynamic with him and Kone. So that'll be interesting if they can get that move over the line. I really like that. Wesley, the right back from Flamengo, again, they're trying to haggle with the Brazilian club here as well. Flamengo wants 25 million. Roma last offer was 20 plus 2 in bonuses. But Wesley, another player who's very highly thought of. He's younger too. I think he's like 21 years old, right back. And we know that Gasperini ball really runs off those wing backs. So it would be Wesley and at this moment Angelino, two solid options, which would kind of get things moving for him.
Yeah. As an aside, coach, aside from Chelsea, nobody has benefited more from this Club World Cup than the Brazilian teams.
Yeah.
Because they looked great in the first 2 weeks when, the European clubs are struggling. They just come off of a 50-plus match season. A lot of the players were kind of expecting to be on vacation at this point of this year, but obviously had to kind of show up for a Club World Cup. Kind of got, railroaded a little bit by the Brazilian clubs. They were undefeated for their first, six games, something like that, 6 or 7 games. And now these player evaluations, like, one, you get the firsthand exposure of just, these guys can compete with the top European competition. It's not just them taking advantage of a lower tier, league or division. And then 2, it's on a grand stage, right? Like, everybody's watching. It's not just, the people in South America that have access, because I don't know that we can really even watch Brazilian leagues here without some
Brazil
streaming.
Is also on Paramount. I believe it is.
Is it on Paramount?
Not that I've ever watched it. I think it's on one of those streaming ones, though.
It's a little bit buried. So I think now is the time for these Brazilian clubs to kind of cash in. I'm not saying that these players are going to be overpriced or overvalued, but usually if you are a Chelsea or a Barcelona, or to an extent a Real Madrid, if you're trying to go and get in, a potentially top tier talent at a discount where you don't want to spend 60, 70 million euros, you can go to Brazil and find these guys that are 20, 25 million that you can maybe develop and get, a top tier player for relatively cheap.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, if Roma can get these moves over the line, I really like that plus 1,400. We'll see. And that could really move if they do get Rios and Ferguson and some of these players that are now a little bit more known commodities. So we'll see what happens. Let's move to the Premier League striker situation, Scott. I know there's a lot of happenings. I know Darwin's on the way out of your club, Liverpool. Yeah. They've been linked with Isak, who Newcastle's want to sell. So let us know what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, like, if you could try to condense this summer transfer window for the Premier League into like one single, vein of content, it's who's going to get the best striker, like who is going to win this striker race, because obviously City have gone out, got Haaland, who's been fantastic for most of his time in City right now. Obviously he had some injuries last year, but been a great talent. Certainly shows what happens when you have a number 9 that you can count on week in and week out. Liverpool largely dominated last season with just Mohamed Salah as their only consistent player. Arsenal tried to give him a run for their money, but ran out of forwards and were playing a midfielder for most of the season. So there's a lot of interest in strikers. Obviously, Premier League has a lot of money to spend. And so we have a pretty interesting merry-go-round of strikers in Europe right now. So off the jump, I think the number 1 that we have is Gyökeres to Arsenal, as we just talked about, or as I just mentioned. Arsenal, desperate need for a striker. Played, I think, 9 matches where Mikel Merino started as their number 9, as largely a box-to-box midfielder. And so, Gyökeres probably had the most, I don't know what we'd say, like, he produced the most in Europe in terms of goal production last year, but maybe in a slightly lesser league in Portugal. Certainly ready to make them the next step up. But Lisbon aren't going to be bullied. They're waiting for a full, a buyout, and Arsenal are trying to nickel and dime them. So I think this is an instance of, when more so than if. Like, I think it's going to happen. I think Arsenal just have to pony up the cash. But man, coach, do you think that makes a significant difference for Arsenal? If they have a true nine that they can count on, partner with Martinelli, partner with Saka, throw in the center, let Odegaard run in behind, is that really enough to push them into a legitimate contender for the title, more so than just this constant second place runner up type of club that they've been for the last 3 years?
I mean, I definitely think that's their biggest thing they're lacking, for sure. I mean, like you said, they had Marino playing striker some matches. They were playing a lot of Kai Havertz, who to me is not a center forward.
Yeah. Havertz has been tough.
Yeah. Gabby Jesus a couple seasons ago gave them more up front than they got this past season. So they really missed a striker. Now, when I look at the futures and I see them at plus 240, am I betting them at plus 240 when Liverpool's plus 200 and they brought in Verts and they're going to bring in another striker to replace Darwin? No, I'm not buying that.
Even City at plus 300. I mean, you're going to get Rodrigo back, which we know, Ballon d'Or or whatever, but clearly a key piece to that midfield. And Haaland had maybe his worst season in the last 4 years last year. You're going to get a bounce back year from him too. So, Arsenal, just to keep pace with City's bounce backness, I think have to do a little bit more than just a center forward, but it's certainly a good step because that's been the biggest thing that their fans have been clamoring for. And I think a lot of the fans of other clubs have largely kind of mocked Arsenal for the fact that they've been having to play. They're a top 4 club in Europe, really, or sorry, in no England, in England, and you're playing a midfielder at striker for 30% of your games. It's tough.
Yeah.
All right. Elsewhere, I think maybe the biggest drama right now, especially this week, it's been between Liverpool and Newcastle. Newcastle, probably owners of maybe outside of Holland, the best true nine in Europe right now. I know there's cases that can be made for Lautaro or Mbappe. But I think, pound for pound, Isak has been quite the player for Newcastle so far. I think he's the reason why they're back in the Champions League. Obviously, a little bit of injury issues. And at 25, he's got 5-7 years maybe left at this kind of peak level. And so it's no surprise that he has admirers outside of Newcastle, Liverpool being one. And Liverpool, as you mentioned, probably going to be offloading Darwin Nunez. Obviously have had the tragedy of Diego Jota, losing him. So they don't have a whole lot right now in the striker position. I think what's been clear to me as a Liverpool fan is that, of course, Isak is going to be their number one priority. And if there is a chance that they have to move him because they do have to, abide by PSR regulations, and in the past they've had to sell players, especially last season they had to sell players to buy players. Once they start making a move for a player of Hugo Ekitike's caliber at Frankfurt, he's a 22-year-old French international that's scoring 20 goals a season in the Bundesliga. Yeah, if they're going to make that move, maybe Isak is available. So I think it made sense for Liverpool to reach out, test the waters, see if there was any wiggle room, especially if they're willing to pay for it. They've showed that they're willing to pay for Florian Wirtz. If they had the money set aside to go for Isak, it makes sense to try to make a run at him. He's a proven Premier League player. There's very little risk there, especially with 5, 6, 7 years left in his prime. No wiggle room from Newcastle. Saudi obviously are going to try to do what they can to do right by Newcastle in terms of not necessarily selling to buy as much as they can. But I think it did mean that they had to give up to the chase for Ekitike. So Liverpool imminently look like they're going to sign Hugo Ekitike from Frankfurt. As I mentioned, young under 23, I think he's 22-year-old striker coming out of the Bundesliga, paired up with Marmoush for most of the last 2 years before Marmoush moved to City in January. Yeah, I mean, I don't think he can be. I don't think he'll be worse than Nunez. Not to say that Nunez has been bad, but Nunez's finishing has been inconsistent at best. From what I've seen, clear-cut chances, big chances. He does a good job of converting. I think he basically converts at his expected goal XG number. So good signing for Liverpool. I don't know, coach. I mean, if you're Newcastle, are you more happy about keeping Isak, or are you more disappointed about not getting this young French star striker potentially in the making in for a decent fee? I think it's around 70 million euros. Where would your head be at if you're a Newcastle fan right now?
I mean, I think I'm probably happy to keep Isak. He's the known commodity. He's been tearing up the Premier League. I think you have to, you know, for the difference in price, I think, they turned out 100 million euro bid or pound bid, whatever it was, from Liverpool to make 30 million for a club that has financial backing of a Saudi, ownership group. I think you probably like to keep the player you have ready. I don't think they're that desperate for sales like some clubs are, which is why they're able to, play a little bit more hardball with a club like Liverpool. But from a Liverpool perspective, if you bring in Etikite and then you've already brought in Flavian Wirtz, you've got Salah still tearing it up. They've already brought in players on the fullback positions in Kirkez and Frimpong. So they're building younger now, right? And they're, Salah's kind of the old man now, but they're building an attack that's young and exciting. They've got a couple wing backs to replace Trent on at the one wing back position or fullback position. So I think Etikite would be more than sufficient for them at this point with the players they have around them.
Yeah, I think the smart thing that Liverpool are doing right now is they're addressing the spine. You mentioned that they've already got their wing backs set aside with Kirkez and Frimpong, which is great. And they're both young, 22, or thereabouts. So as long as they pan out, which it seems like they should, obviously Kirkez had a great season for Bournemouth last year in the Premier League. Shouldn't, again, be a relatively low risk. And then Frimpong has been, Dutch international, did really well in Bundesliga. Again, hopefully low risk there. They won the league last year with Mohamed Salah being largely their only consistent offensive output. Gakpo was pretty consistent when he played, but had his own injury issues. Diaz, I think, was super inconsistent. Nunez was super inconsistent. Jota was consistent when he played, but again, had injury issues. So they need to address the spine. They need to get the 9 and the 10 figured out. Vert's not a traditional 10. Not saying that he's going to play as a 10. But having Ekitike, Wirtz as your central attacking players in some capacity, working through the midfield that has been strong between McAllister, Szoboszlai, or Gravenberch. That's great. That just leaves the defensive duo, the center backs. Van Dijk has been holding that down for the better part of 7 seasons. He's had a different partner for the last 3 or 4 years between Matip and now Konate. I think that'll probably be the place they address next. Mark Gahey from Crystal Palace, the captain that brought Crystal Palace their first major trophy in their club's history. I think he's on the short list. And Konate may be moving to Real Madrid. Seems like he's not going to re-sign with Liverpool unless they really come up in their wage structure, which is, as we know from FSG, probably unlikely. So the question is, do they just let him go to Real Madrid next summer on a free a la Trent? Do they try to cash in now? There have been some rumors of Rodrigo moving to Liverpool, potentially as a Luis Diaz replacement. Does that make sense? I think that's probably where Liverpool focus next once they lock down Ekitike, which is good. I mean, you've basically addressed everything from, your midfield's been set for the last 2 years. They did a great job overhauling the midfield. Wing backs are now set. Goalkeeper set with Alisson probably good for another 2 or 3 seasons. And then Mamardashvili coming in as the young Georgian goalkeeper. So I think they're doing a pretty good job of kind of like cycling through the areas of need, addressing the spine now. Focus probably, assuming they wrap up this Ekitike deal in the next couple of days, being center back.
Yeah, the champs are making moves and trying to strengthen. It should be interesting. So just wrap the Premier League quick, Scott. So I saw the Mbeumo from Brentford rumors to United. If that happens, they've already brought in Cunha from Wolves. I mean, they're trying, I guess, their best to try to improve a squad that really struggled last year.
I mean, their finishing, we talked about it time and time again last season. It's been bad. Their front line was just so bad at converting goals, and we would take unders pretty regularly because their defense was relatively okay. I mean, they relatively okay for a team that struggled to finish, outside of the relegation zone. So I think Cunha is a good shout there. Mbeumo, I don't know if Brentford's going to give up in Buemo without a long, drawn out fight. If you're United, you really have no wiggle room with some of the wages you still have on the books, with the money that you've spent. So if you're going to go above the odds for Mbeumo, you better be certain that he's going to be the guy that can, score 15, 20 goals for you for the next at least 2 or 3 seasons. So that's a little bit of a risk, but, let them play that out.
Yeah. And then Chelsea, they brought in a couple strikers already.
Yeah.
Who is it?
Liam
Delap
from
Pedro, and then Liam Delap.
Yeah. It's like we said with the Club World Cup, that really bailed them out. They were at a point where like this was the window where they had to like finalize what their roster is going to look like for the next 5 years, because they signed everybody to 8-year contracts, and they're closing in on coming PSR non-compliant. But picking up 100 and whatever it was 30-40 million pounds in prize winnings from the Club World Cup will certainly alleviate that PSR pressure quite a bit. Is Liam Delap going to be their long-term answer as a number 9? I don't know. I mean, he was a fine striker for Ipswich as the only outlet that they had, and I know he comes from a good academy, but is Liam Delap going to be a guy that we're going to be talking about as a golden boot challenger or a long shot even that we want to take at the beginning of a season in the next 3 years? I don't think so.
Yeah. They could be interesting as like club to finish highest without Liverpool if the odds are right. Another plus 800 to win or finish top, win the league. I mean, I'd be curious to see what they are with, like, I don't know, sometimes they get quirky little things like highest without Liverpool and City, like kind of those bets. I don't know.
My concern is like, but they just started their summer vacation, right? And then they're gonna have to pick up preseason probably in the next 2 weeks because the season starts in 4 weeks.
Yeah, it's a long season for these. It's gonna be a long year for these guys.
They're gonna be in Champions League. Like I'm genuinely concerned. I know they've spent more money on their squad than anybody else, and they should have more depth than anybody else. But there is still a legitimate concern about how prepared are they going to be physically for this next season.
Yeah.
So it's something to keep an eye on at the very least. I understand if people want to buy in on them. They've certainly proved that their project is starting to get on track under Maresca, but I am concerned of just how deep they played in the Club World Cup, how little rest they're going to have, and then how do they manage a 50-plus game season next season?
Yeah, I think that'll be interesting to see how they handle that. So let's wrap quickly on our too soon predictions. You have a couple lined up already, Scotty. You hinted at one already.
Yeah.
Give them to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think Como are going to finish in European qualification this season. I think the stars are kind of aligning. Obviously, they're having a decent, by our means, projected summer. We talk about Roma winning the summer transfer window a few years ago. Didn't work out for them. But Como are investing. It seems what they're doing is sustainable. They have a up and coming manager in place that should, as you mentioned, provide some consistency into this next season. With everybody else kind of scrambling a little bit just to hold pat, I think it's a good opportunity for them to finish in a spot that gets them into European qualification, even if that's the Conference League. And I think that'll be a huge for a club like Como. So that's going to be my first too soon prediction. I think right now, let's see Como in a top 6 or so spot.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. And I think if they do qualify, even if it's Conference League, that is a huge play for them. Big accomplishment. So I buy that one. I buy it. I could see, especially if the Coppa Italia winner comes from the teams that are already in the top 6 and that 7th spot becomes Conference League, I think they have a very good shot at that.
Now, going the inverse of that, I'm going to take Newcastle to finish outside of the top 7. Reasons being, one, we saw what happened when Newcastle qualified for Champions League last time around. They really struggled in the domestic league campaign. I think they're probably going to run into similar issues. They don't have, again, a lot of that depth. Their center backs right now are still largely old. Dan Burn, Fabian Schär, maybe not quite the most consistent at this point as they're getting up there in age. So I'm concerned about them a little bit handling the 2-leg competitions. And then on the flip side, I don't know that we're going to have another down season in the Premier League like we saw this year. Listen, Liverpool won the league. I'm not going to downplay Liverpool finishing on top. But we do know that some of those traditional clubs, City, to an extent, Chelsea, United, Spurs, all vastly underperformed this year. Couple that with some of these rising clubs, Brighton, you see come in here and there. We saw Brentford make a pretty good run last year. What happens with West Ham? What happens with Aston Villa? Can these guys kind of sneak in? I think Newcastle are going to struggle, and depending on who they get to come in and back up Isak, now that they're not getting Ekitike, if it's Visa, great. If it's somebody else that's further down the line of their pecking order and it's a little bit more of a gamble, the one negative part of Alexander Isak is he's not been the most reliable player in terms of injury over the last year or two. And so if he comes in and he has to miss, 6-8 weeks of the season, they could find themselves finishing outside the top 7. So that's going to be my second too soon prediction. Right now, I think Newcastle will finish outside of European qualification for next year.
All right. I don't know if I buy that one quite yet. I want to see how the transfer market shakes out, but hey, that'll be a bold one for sure if it happens.
Yeah, I just like I said, I think we're going to be in for a really good Premier League this year. I think there's going to be a lot of really strong teams. I think like I said, the teams that struggled last year will bounce back, and what might happen? Can one of United or Tottenham wake up, as a sleeping giant? Nah, maybe Spurs aren't quite a sleeping giant, but they won. They're in the Champions League. They won Europa. Can they carry that momentum over into a strong domestic campaign next season? We'll see.
Yeah. All right. And I know you got one more.
Speaking of United, Cunha. We just talked about United really struggling, needing a true finisher in the front line. I honestly think Cunha can do that. I think I haven't seen his number come out yet. I think he's going to score at least 10 goals for United in the domestic league campaign. I think if you're combining, the other cup runs that he has, 20 goals might be on the table for him. So I think that's one to keep an eye on. I think that's actually a really good transfer for United. Obviously carried Wolves quite a bit, but Wolves have talent in pockets of their squad, but they don't have a player of like Bruno Fernandes's quality. And I think pairing those two up will actually prove pretty fruitful for United moving forward.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I think that's you sign a player like that to get you at minimum 10 goals, right? What they spent on him, what their needs are. So shall be interesting to see if he pans out, if they are able to also get him Bueno and how much he's able to score. So all right. So some early predictions there. We'll see how they pan out. Check back in, I guess, quite some time. Months. Hang with us. We'll update as the season goes on.
Revisit.
But yeah. Anything else you want to leave the listeners with, Scotty, tonight before we wrap it up?
No, I mean, like I said, I think we're closer than people might realize to the beginning of the season. So hopefully we start to see some of these squads take shape a little bit more in final capacity. And then, we'll be seeing preseason games, like legitimate preseason games in the next week or two. I think there's some teams going to Asia, some teams going to the US, some teams staying local. And we'll get some really hot takes that really probably don't mean much, but we're going to read too much into anyways coming up.
Yeah. It'll be fun. The season will get going before you know it, and we'll have plenty of great coverage and hopefully plenty of winners to give out. So thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you guys again soon.